to be with you, David.
Part of Labor's main attack here is that the government might have tried to horse trade on gun laws for other measures. As a former leader of the government in the House, you know horse trading takes place.
I'll tell you what you don't horse trade over, David. That's Australia's gun laws, which had bipartisan support. They should be above politics. This is an issue, particularly given issues of national security, that we just shouldn't even enter into political discourse in terms of trading.
But are there other areas where you don't horse trade? I mean, I get gun laws.
There are.
I mean, you did horse trade on a lot of other things. What areas shouldn't you actually horse trade on?
You don't trade over issues of national security, point one. That's just beyond belief that the emails that were referred to by Bill Shorten today in question time, that clearly indicated from Minister Keenan's office a relationship or a linking of the 12-month clause on these guns with a bill on migration. They had absolutely nothing to do with the issue of gun control. And what's extraordinary is that you had, as well, Malcolm Turnbull all morning refusing to answer a straight question. All he had to do this morning, David, was say no between the linking of whether it was on the table, and he wasn't capable of doing it.
Let's be clear about something, though. What's being discussed here, this import ban on 7-shot firearms, that's not part of the Howard 1996 firearms agreement.
No, of course it's not. But
Labor's been suggesting all day that this is weakening the Howard firearms laws.
Of course it is, because the principles that are there, of course there are new guns, essentially, is what's happened, and they need new regulations. What's happened here with the Adler gun is that it is something that's new. COAG are discussing it, but clearly the government has been discussing it in relation to securing Senator Leyonhjelm's votes in the Parliament.
Fair enough.
And that's why it's completely unacceptable.
But we're not technically talking about watering down the Howard laws.
I tell you what, David, I was here when the Howard laws went through. They went through unanimously. They went through with the bipartisan support of the Parliament.
7-shot firearms.
No, they didn't. But I tell you what, they weren't technical. They were a matter of a whole principle, which is getting dangerous guns off our streets. That's what they were aimed at doing, and they were successful.
But are you saying there's anything wrong in what the government's done here? When this Adler gun comes along 18 months ago or whatever, and there's a concern they're about to be imported, together with COAG there was a deal to ban them for 12 months, work out what to do. Was that the right course of action?
Well, clearly we need a permanent ban. But in terms of the processes that COAG go through, the problem here, David, is that you have in writing emails from the Minister's office on behalf of Minister Keenan and Minister Dutton with Senator Leyonhjelm linking the issue of gun control. And we know Senator Leyonhjelm's views. This is a person who, frankly, made quite repulsive comments after the Lindt Cafe siege, and on a number of occasions where you've had mass shootings, has intervened in the public debate in a way which brings no credit to him, or dare I say it, to the Parliament of Australia. The fact that those views that are so strongly opposed by Australians. Australians don't want to go down the US road. Australians are very proud, no matter what our political background, of what we have done here, and give credit where credit's due. John Howard's leadership at the time being undermined here, these laws being undermined by a government being prepared to negotiate over legislation that has nothing to do with guns. And that is the concern that we have here.
But on this gun, obviously you want to see it banned permanently.
Absolutely.
Others, like David Leyonhjelm, say it's needed for shooting feral pigs and whatever. COAG's...
Well, David Leyonhjelm is opposed to gun laws, to gun restrictions.
Correct.
That's his view.
But this is for COAG to work out, right? That's how they regulate firearms.
Yeah, that's how it happens in terms of, like, a range of things that happen in our federation. You require the Commonwealth and state and territory governments. But what is a necessary component of that is Commonwealth leadership. And if you have the national government sitting down in a back corner somewhere with emails with a senator's office, a senator who is opposed to any restrictions on gun control in this country, then that is of real concern. And what was interesting this morning was while Malcolm Turnbull was on his feet in the House, of course, Tony Abbott, who was the Prime Minister when these trade-offs were occurring, tweeted out his opposition to any linking of gun control with any other piece of legislation.
No horse trading.
So that would indicate Tony Abbott was right in terms of his tweet. Unfortunately, his government was wrong when they were prepared to horse trade.
Just before we leave guns, you heard the government repeatedly today point out that when it comes to illegal firearms, Labor has twice voted against mandatory jail terms on the trading of illegal firearms. How does Labor defend that?
Come on, David. You and I both know that the issue of mandatory sentencing is a very different issue. That's about the law, the rule of law. There's a whole, there are pages, books, learned scholars
so the principle
who are
of
opposed to mandatory sentencing. That it's a whole separate legal issue in which lawyers, of which I'm not one, spend a lot of time debating those issues. The idea somehow that we are anything other than strong on those issues is quite frankly absurd, and our record is that we're prepared to take action wherever it's required. And of course, Labor took strong action in terms of guns, not just in terms of John Howard's laws, but of course that required as well state governments to undertake strong action as well. And in New South Wales, of course, and various other states, that was Labor governments.
Let's turn to your portfolio. Now, the backpackers tax went through the House yesterday, the changes that the government's announced, including an increase in the departure tax, the passenger movement charge. Labor's opposed to that. You did put up the passenger movement, though, charge in government.
We did, David, and one of the things that we said, though, when we went to the election was that we would support the freeze that was a bipartisan freeze, it must be said, from the government and the opposition. Both went to the election saying that that would occur. What's happened here, the problem with the backpacker tax, it came in with no discussion, with no economic analysis about its impact, and we've had 18 months of chaos as a result. Farmers not being able to plant crops, tourist sectors not being able to get staff. And a massive drop-off already, even though the tax isn't even in place, because these days there are these wonderful little things in front of you whereby people can log on, get what the details are, and the message is out there that backpackers aren't welcome in Australia.
So you voted against this in the Senate?
Well, what we've done is refer it to a committee. We want to get the facts out there. What's amazing is when we met with Scott Morrison's office and the officials, and we asked, have you done any modelling on the increase in the passenger movement charge or the departure tax? We were told no. When we asked them what is the difference between the 32% rate of taxation on the backpacker tax originally proposed and the government's halfway house sort of semi-backflip of 19%, what will the difference be? We were told the modelling is based upon a 60% reduction. That is the same, that it won't have an impact. So we want to get to the details. Evidence-based policy requires you to get the evidence first and then you make a decision. The problem with this government is it makes a decision and then looks for evidence. We're ensuring through the Senate process that we get this right, but on the passenger movement charge, we will hold the government to account, certainly as part of that process, for what it has said itself. It described it as strangling the goose, the golden goose that is the tourism industry.
Right. And finally, you've been very critical of the government today over infrastructure spending, or a lack of infrastructure spending, pointing to the amount that was actually spent on various projects last financial year. Are you saying Labor would actually have gone ahead and spent this money?
Absolutely, we would have. The Cross River Rail, had we been re-elected in 2013, would have been more than half completed by now. The Melbourne Metro would be under construction. The M80 wouldn't have been stopped in Melbourne. the Perth Airport rail link, the $500 million that was in the budget, would have still been there. Now, the problem with what this government has done was that they essentially, when they came to office, either cancelled projects completely in the category of projects like Melbourne Metro and Cross River Rail. In other areas, they simply paused them. So the M80, the South Road upgrade in Adelaide, other projects they stopped until they realised, oh yeah, they are good projects, and then they began. In the M80's case, the latest upgrade 2 weeks ago. Or they just slowed down the funding for important projects like the Pacific Highway or the Bruce Highway. When you look at the forward estimates in this year's budget, the figure for rail transport investment in 2019-20 is zero, not $1, and that's because they haven't begun anything. All they've done is gone along and opened projects that we funded, like the Moreton Bay rail link to Redcliffe that was opened last month. And the problem is that investment is dropping off. That will have a huge impact on future economic growth. It's currently having an impact on jobs.
Anthony Albanese, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.